Good morning, everyone. May we begin. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, experts, diplomats, welcome to the Pre-AU Summit Hybrid Seminar co-hosted by the Institute for Security Studies and the Institute for Peace and Security Studies. For the 39th AU Summit, reforms amidst a fraying global order. I'll be your moderator for today, and my name is Jesu Timilei Akamo. If you want to call me, you can call me Timmy to avoid trying to pronounce my name. And I trust I would have a wonderful conversation today. To begin the conversation, we're going to have welcome remarks and the introduction of speakers first. Afterwards, we go into the panel discussion. Then we'll take question and answers. And after that, the closing remarks. So permit me to call to the floor Dr. Paul Simon Andy, Institute for Security Studies, Regional Director for East Africa and representative to the African Union, for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored to stand in front of you today and to welcome you to this 10th edition of our Pre-AU Summit seminar that we have the pleasure to organize for the 6th consecutive time now with our colleagues from the Institute for Peace and Security Studies. As the name indicates, this is a pre-AU summit seminar, which provides us with a platform to discuss what is at stake at the AU summit, what is on the agenda, and it provides insight into what will be or what should be discussed during this annual meeting. And after the summit, the ISS, with its partners, IPSS, and times also Amani Africa, we also organize a post-AU seminar. And as the name indicates, it's an opportunity to discuss decisions that were taken, discussions that happened, that took place at the AU summit. Today's seminar, just like the upcoming summit, are taking place in a really defining moment. Global and African multilateralisms are under threat, are facing their biggest challenges. And the AU, as the most visible symbol of African multilateralism, experiences these challenges in multifaceted ways. Collective security is under threat in Africa, but also globally. And we see the multiplication of bilateral, but also minilateral arrangements based on short-term transactional agreements. War is back in Africa after successive years of decreasing war-related fatalities. If you look at the curve, you'll see it's upwards. The Horn of Africa is one of Africa's epicenters of protracted instability, together with the Sahel and the Great Lakes region. The AU has decided to accelerate its institutional reform process and the review of its peace and security framework as a way of adjusting to the new global and African context. It is our hope that this seminar provides us all with the opportunity to engage into robust discussions about the way in which the AU can best navigate the stormy weather of our current time. I wish us all productive exchanges and hopefully also useful inputs into AU's policy processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Andy. Then I would call Ms. Letty Longwe, the APSP Director at the Institute for Peace and Security Studies, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Timmy. Excellencies, partners, and colleagues, good morning and welcome to today's event on the margins of the 39th African Union Summit. This event, as you heard earlier from Dr. Paul, is co-organized by the Institute of Peace and Security Studies and the Institute of Security Studies. So the difference is in the peace. My name is Letty Tembolongwe, and I work at the Institute for Peace and Security Studies. I think today's topic, really, APSA reforms amidst a fragmented global order is not only timely, relevant, it's long overdue. The question is, how will the African Union respond to crises and partnerships in the current existing position that they're in? Is there a need for reform of the existing institutional as well as peace and security frameworks? Is the African Union, we should ask ourselves, is the African Union fit for purpose? Do we need to review all these other instruments that I spoke about earlier on? As heads of state meet and discuss in the next coming days, we are hopeful, we won't be there, but we are hopeful that these are some of the issues that they'll be tackling and to come up with practical solutions that will be put to action on the continent. Today's event will try to unpack some of these issues through a panel of seasoned speakers that we've lined up. And the idea is to come up with practical recommendations that we may be able to share with the African Union and other actors later on. So without much ado, without wasting much time, I'm going to hand over to the Master of Ceremony so that you can take us through the business of the morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Letty. So, into the discussion proper. First, I would call Dr. David Johannes, Project Manager and Senior Researcher, Training for Peace, ISS. He'll be our moderator for the panel session. Then I call the panelists. His Excellency, Willie Yamitwe, Ambassador of the Republic of Burundi to Ethiopia and Permanent Representative to the African Union. Our Excellency, Rebecca Amuge Otengo, Ambassador of the Republic of Uganda to Ethiopia and Permanent Representative to the African Union. And Professor Tim Murithi, Senior Advisor, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, and the Article 109 Coalition. So I'll hand over the floor to Dr. Paul Simon Andy. Pardon me. Regional Director for IPSS, East Africa, and representative to the African Union. So I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Dawitt. After the panel session, we'll go into the questions and discussions. During the questions and discussion session, Dr. Dawitt would handle the in-person one, and then we'll turn to the online audience occasionally to get questions and comments from our online audience. Dr. Dawitt, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Simi. Good morning, colleagues, excellencies, and distinguished panelists. I'd like to welcome you to this seminar, which is held on the margins of the 39th AU Summit, which is going to happen in the coming weeks. First of all, I'd like to apologize for some of the changes in the lineup, including our gender imbalance composition of the panelists, which we've actually tried to address, but apologies for the last minute changes. I would like to start by drawing your attention to one truism or one feature which has almost become a common practice in most of the discussions when it comes to policy discussion like ours, whether it is in Davos, whether it is Security Council discussions or deliberations like today, which is the weakening of the multilateral environment. One key aspect of the discussion in this kind of seminars and events and deliberation is that, yes, the multilateral environment has weakened, but the key implication in terms of addressing the collective security globally. That applies in terms of how the weakening of the multilateral system is hampering collective efforts of the United Nations, as well as regional actors such as the African Union. A key part of the discussion in most of the conversation is the fact that these institutions who has the clear mandate or the raison d'etre of promoting durable peace are actually failing to address most of the challenges that are facing them globally, but also this problem is more acute when it comes to the African Union and when it comes to the African region. So while analyzing what is not working is very essential, it forms only part of the equation. Equally, if not more important, is actually the search for solution through ongoing review processes, both at the UN and at the African Union. So the year to 2025 was pivotal in the sense that there were numerous attempts and discussions that were happening in terms of how to address the current challenges. But the truth of the matter remains that these review initiatives and discussions, they were overshadowed by the sheer size of the challenges. So the focus has always been on what is not working. So at the UN, there were significant attention has been paid to the Pact for the Future, and in terms of implementing some of the decisions, the commitment that was made by member states, including the review of the UN peace operations, the peace-building architecture review, and similar processes. So the African Union has also done its own fair share of such kind of conversation. Key among them is the review of all forms of peace security governance frameworks of the African Union, which has been underway since August. So our objective today in this seminar is actually to examine how evolving conflict dynamics, institutional review processes, and geopolitical shifts may shape the summit's deliberations and the peace and security outcomes in 2026. So we're going to anchor our discussion in the whole process discussion around the review of the AU peace security governance frameworks, as well as the broader discussion about the AU reform, which, as most of you know, has about 8 priority areas, but the recalibration or the revitalization of the AU's peace, security, and governance framework is just one part of the whole reform initiative. So we're going to be focusing in terms of the peace and security outlook in some of the conflict hotspots on the continent, and how would the AU recalibrate its approach coming in 2026 in terms of addressing this challenge? Are we going to see business as usual or a continuation of the same, or we're going to see some change? how are ongoing recommendation in terms of revitalizing the AUP security governance frameworks will be implemented? And implementation lies both with the African Union Commission, with the member states, but with all of us in this room, including think tanks, CSO, and partners as well. And in addition, also, how does the prospect of elections in some of the transition states, in terms of, and also how does the AU fare in terms of implementing its norms and principles when it's come to unconstitutional change of government, which is actually looming to be one of the key challenges affecting the continent's peace and security context. So we have an expert panel who is going to address some of these critical questions that we'll be raising. So let me just briefly introduce the key speakers. The first one is His Excellency Willy Niamitwe, Ambassador of the Republic of Burundi to Ethiopia and permanent representative to the African Union. We also have Dr. Paul Simon Handy, Regional Director for East Africa and representative to the African Union. And finally, we also have Professor Tim Uriti, Senior Advisor to the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation and Article 109 Coalition. We would be glad to hear more. So I'm going to start by posing the first question to Ambassador Willy. So my first question will be, I'd like to get your perspective in terms of the priorities of the current reform process, especially when it comes to the review of peace, security, governance frameworks. Which aspects should be prioritized as part of the ongoing review of the AU peace and security governance frameworks to enhance AU's collective decision-making and crisis response mechanisms? So as you speak to the priority areas, we would really appreciate it if you could also focus on specific APSA, AGA instruments or principle that you would consider needs overhaul, reinterpretation, or any other adjustment. So this will be the first question. And second one is, as I mentioned earlier, member states are a critical aspect of the current reform processes. So to ensure effective conflict prevention and peace building on the continent, how should the AU member states support the implementation of all these Addis-based discussions, so to speak? How do we take it to the member states? So we'd like to hear more about expectations from member states. And the third question around priorities for 2026, but let's start with the first two and then we'll come back to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Dawit. And thank you for ISS and IPSS for organizing this event. And, you know, Burundi will be chairing the AU starting from next week. So, which means that this meeting is comes timely. And I'm really delighted to contribute to this conversation as the incoming chair. One more thing, Dr. Dawit, I believe that I'm the sole Francophone panelist. I mean, he can understand both languages. Okay, très bien. So allow me to continue in French to respond to your questions. Je vais parler en français. Comme je le disais, le Burundi va présider l'Union à partir du 14 février. Alors, quand nous sommes ici en train de parler de priorités, comment nous allons cheminer pour bâtir l'Afrique que nous voulons, face surtout à la menace persistante des défis qui sont multiformes. Si nous parlons par exemple du terrorisme, nous voyons les changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement qui reviennent au galop. On peut même se demander s'ils étaient partis. Les conflits communautaires ou même certains pays qui font face à des ingérences extérieures. Nous sommes en train de voir, même au-delà du continent, un autre ordre et pour quitter le périmètre du diplomatique, on voit bien se dessiner même un désordre mondial. L'Afrique a besoin de renforcer sa capacité d'anticipation, la rapidité de décision et même la cohérence dans l'action. Alors, personnellement, sur le plan individuel, je pense que trois priorités seraient essentielles à mettre sur la table des discussions durant les échéances futures. Par exemple, nous pensons plutôt à la prévention plutôt qu'à la réaction. Nous sommes toujours amenés à réagir plutôt qu'à prévenir. Nous devrions investir davantage dans les mécanismes d'alerte précoce, la diplomatie préventive, afin d'éviter l'escalade des crises. Certaines crises que nous avons vues venir en Afrique étaient déjà dans les discussions, dans les débats. Alors, il y a le principe d'appropriation africaine. Nous avons toujours parlé, ma foi, et plusieurs fois d'une manière théorique, de la solution africaine aux problèmes africains. Mais nous sommes en train de voir que plusieurs crises africaines ne trouvent pas solution en Afrique. Nous voyons toujours ces crises, les mécanismes de négociation, de médiation, ou les bons offices offerts par des acteurs externes au continent. Alors, il faut aussi le financement de la paix en termes de prévisibilité du financement de la paix. Sans ressources stables, je suis persuadé que même les meilleurs mécanismes restent inefficaces. Je le disais dans une conversation, combien d'argent nous dépensons dans nos réunions plutôt que dans l'action. Quand nous avons des troupes sur terrain, nous pouvons prendre le cas de la Somalie, et on dit que les troupes viennent de passer plusieurs mois sans salaire, sans solde, alors que nous nous déplaçons toujours, nous prenons des vols longue distance, nous demeurons dans des hôtels 5 étoiles pour parler de la paix, et nous dépensons plusieurs millions de dollars au moment où le petit soldat qui se trouve sur terrain sous le feu n'est pas en train de toucher sa solde. Alors, nous devons aussi penser au fond de la paix de l'Union africaine. Comment est-ce que nous pouvons financer ces opérations de la paix? Alors, vous avez parlé des instruments de l'architecture africaine de paix et de sécurité qui pourraient être révisés. Personnellement, je pense que nous ne devrions pas entrer dans une dynamique de les remplacer. Il faudrait plutôt les renforcer, les adapter aux réalités contemporaines. Par exemple, nous avons une autre compréhension de la souveraineté. Nous devrions la faire évoluer. C'est déjà ça dans les textes de l'Union africaine, mais il faut vraiment la faire évoluer dans le réel. Nous pouvons aussi parler peut-être du concept de sécurité. Nous sommes en train de voir que la sécurité actuellement ce n'est pas seulement la sécurité dans le concept que nous connaissions, il y a aussi des aspects ou des dimensions économiques, des dimensions climatiques, ou même des dimensions technologiques. On n'a pas besoin de traverser des frontières pour constituer une menace à un pays, même à distance, par des procédés technologiques, on peut constituer une menace. Et comment, maintenant, pour venir à votre deuxième ou troisième question, comment les États membres pourraient soutenir ce processus? Alors, effectivement, c'est sur base de ce que j'ai dit, je pense que la revitalisation des cadres de la paix, de sécurité, de gouvernance pourrait, si bien entendu, elle repose sur un engagement politique clair, nous aider à cheminer vers la stabilisation de notre continent. Donc, cela impliquerait, bien entendu, comme je l'ai dit au départ, une volonté politique qui est constante, le renforcement des capacités nationales. Si au niveau national, il y a des faiblesses, au niveau international ou régional, on ne peut pas évoluer. Et une meilleure coordination avec les communautés économiques régionales et les mécanismes régionaux. Et cela nous amènerait aussi à parler de du respect des normes démocratiques et constitutionnelles. Voilà, donc en grosso modo, je propose, et on l'a toujours proposé dans les débats de l'ISS, au IPSS, et dans les débats aussi de l'Union africaine, la promotion d'une culture de responsabilité mutuelle. Et vous savez, la paix en Afrique, ce n'est pas une option, c'est une obligation collective. Je vous remercie, docteur.
Thank you, Ambassador. Perhaps if you can take a few more minutes so that if you can just also, perhaps in relation to the upcoming theme of the year, so what key intervention the AU need to take to reinforce the implementation of the theme of the year? So probably how should we approach the implementation of the theme of the year, perhaps differently than we used to do, perhaps?
Alors, cela m'amène à parler des priorités burundaises durant cette présidence. Nous allons nous focaliser sur 3 piliers. Le premier pilier étant le thème de l'année qui est lié à l'eau et à l'assainissement. Et le deuxième pilier que le Burundi met en avant, c'est la consolidation de la paix et de la sécurité à travers, bien entendu, l'initiative Faire taire les armes à l'horizon 2030. Et le troisième pilier est lié à la renaissance africaine à travers l'innovation, le renforcement des capacités et l'autonomisation des jeunes et des femmes. Bien entendu, le Burundi n'oubliera pas de mettre en avant les priorités de l'Afrique et les priorités de l'organisation, que ce soit les changements climatiques, la santé des populations africaines, la mise en œuvre effective de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, la libre circulation des biens, des personnes, des idées, ainsi que d'autres priorités de l'Afrique. Mais ces 3 piliers vont guider la présidence burundaise. Et ces 3 piliers sont intimement liés. Si nous parlons de l'eau et de l'assainissement, sans quantité suffisante d'eau, on ne peut pas asseoir une stabilité du continent et des populations. Sans les systèmes d'assainissement sûrs, on ne peut pas envisager une population en bonne santé. Et bien entendu, ça nous mène droit aussi à certains conflits. Et vous savez que les changements climatiques contribuent beaucoup à la déstabilisation de certaines contrées de notre continent, ce qui, in fine, nous mène vers des poches de tension. Nous ne pouvons pas faire taire les armes à l'horizon de 2030 si nous ne gardons pas à l'esprit que la paix, la sécurité et le développement sont intimement liés. Voilà, donc, en gros, cela est lié au thème de l'année. Ce thème qui va guider les interactions et les actions de tout le continent et de tous les États membres cadre bien avec la conversation que nous sommes en train d'avoir aujourd'hui. Alors, il faudra que nous soyons à mesure au courant de l'année ou même à la fin, quand nous serons en train de présenter notre rapport sur la mise en œuvre du thème de l'année, de parler d'actions et d'actes concrets qui ont été mis en œuvre dans le sens de la mise en œuvre de ce thème de l'année. Voilà, je pense avoir répondu brièvement à votre question, docteur. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. A number of critical points were raised, particularly what should be the priorities of the ongoing review of peace, security, governance frameworks. What is very important is what you said about not really to reinvent the wheel as we go. And there are a number of reform initiatives that are currently happening, but also we should not go for a clean slate in terms of having a new peace and security framework or AGA or APSA as we call it. So you reinforcing the current ones. But you've also alluded to the critical question of bridging the gap between early warning and early response. That also has become one of, let's say, the truism. We've been saying this a lot. I think probably we need to take the current moment of crisis as an opportunity to really rethink in terms of how do we address this long-standing challenge, as well as the question of financing. So these are all critical points. So I'll move to the next panelist, Dr. Paul Simon Handy from the Institute for Security Studies. So as I said, a lot is happening in terms of the review of these frameworks. But I'd like to know how you define success when it comes to the current review processes. What are your milestones or indicators or markers? And then what are the key determinants in terms of what would shape the success of these reform processes? And it goes back to what Ambassador Willie was saying about the political will, engagement, solidarity of the member states with these reform initiatives, taking this to the level of national capacity building and the coordination between the AU and RX. So how does success look like? And what are the key determinants? That's question number one. Then the second question is in terms of, you can zoom in a little bit in terms of the reform processes to look into two key aspects of the peace and security architecture, namely PSC and the AGA-APSA synergy. So what key priorities, opportunities, and challenge should the AU consider to strengthen the PSC in the context of the review of these frameworks? And secondly, also, how do we move forward and move the needle, remove the envelope in terms of the integration of the AGA-APSA architectures? I'll come to it.
Thank you very much, my colleague David. Maybe I'll start with a disclaimer. I wasn't supposed to be on this panel. I was literally hijacked yesterday evening saying that I have to be on this panel. So, but you know, so I just want to say that upfront. So everything I say should be seen under the excuse that I wasn't prepared. But there are two ways of looking at the reform processes and maybe also defining success. But to the reform, particularly the reform I'm not going to get into the reform of the whole AU, but more on the peace and security architecture. There are two, you might call them schools of thought, but let's just say two ways of looking at it. The first one comprises people who think that the framework are extremely solid. They are good. They are. There is literally no instability or insecurity situation that is not addressed by these frameworks. So the proponent of these way of looking at APSA say that the only problem we have is political will. So the theory of the framework is fantastic, but there's no political will or not sufficient political will. The other way of looking at it is comprised of analysts who are of the view that political will is the condition of multilateralism. That if there's no political will, then maybe the frameworks are not as perfect as they sound. That in reality, they need to be adjusted to current realities. And maybe these adjustments will generate political will. The reality is probably between the two. What we have at the moment is clear that the insecurity situations that the African continent faces are not those that were in place when APSA was being set up, was being literally put in place. So the African Union had, and the RECs, we shouldn't forget them, had to literally adjust while actually, adjust with time, actually. So now the reform would like to address these two dynamics, the changing context, but also both internal capacity of the AU and the political situation in the continent. Ambassador Willie mentioned, in my view, one of the most important things is the AU preventive work, which is central, but which is probably also one of the weakest points at the AU. The AU is a political organization whose added value lies on its capacity to convene, but also the legitimacy of its outputs. But if you look at how the AU is organized, and particularly the Commission, I'm not sure that the prevention dimension has the importance and the significance it should be having. But the Commission itself is aware of it. One of the examples I like to take to illustrate this matter of fact is the situation of the AU liaison offices, the high representatives, special envoys. If you look at the way the liaison offices are equipped with staff, with budgets, then you probably come to the conclusion that that's not the way you promote preventive diplomacy the best. There are certainly bigger efforts to make to ensure that those offices who are actually the representations of the AU in regions, in specific countries, that they do what the AU should be doing best, namely offering good offices. So I think, and it's good that the next chair is here. So Ambassador Willie will judge Burundi by its capacity to mobilize this preventive diplomacy work. Now, to maybe one or two priorities in this regard to address the second dimension of your question. There's some sort of elephant in the room. The recent reform report is suggesting a big construction site, namely the merger of AGA and APSA. It's an important one, but we have to take a step back and wonder whether, I mean, the theory of it is probably great. There are very good arguments in bringing them together. And in fact, when you look at the spirit, even the letter of the protocol establishing the Peace and Security Council, it already identified governance as probably the key component of instability, but also the key area that should be addressed to create the conditions for stability. So the protocol, the PSC protocol, actually recognizes governance as the center of all efforts. But in reality, we also know that in practice, when you merge governance and political affairs with defense and security matters, there is often a victim, and it's not going to be defense and security matters. So sometimes the best way to kill those governance and political issues is to merge them with defense and security matters. So the architects of this merger should be very vigilant to make sure that one of the key components of instability is not swallowed by urgent defense and security requirements. Governance has to do with long-term considerations. Defense and security often are extremely urgent. When a crisis breaks out somewhere, we need to intervene. There's also more political will to intervene once a crisis has broken out. It's visible, we are seen doing something, whereas long-term issues of governance generally do not create the type of visibility that actors who intervene after the fact would like to have. As somebody was saying, it's very difficult for somebody involved in preventive diplomacy to have the Nobel Peace Prize, because in reality, success means nothing has happened. So nobody can be credited of this success. Whereas after a crisis breaks out, intervention is made, and stabilization comes, then the benefits can be reaped relatively easily. So political will, to mobilize political will for something that you can't touch, a success that is almost invisible, but necessary, is always more difficult than the opposite. So this, to conclude on that aspect of the merger of AGA and APSA, I will say the key element will be how the policy framework of this merger will be defined. So I think the success factors will have to be embedded in the way this policy framework is defined, with a timeline, but also the possibility maybe of going back to the current situation. Maybe if it doesn't work in a certain timeline, maybe go back to the fact that we might need those two different architectures, a peace and security one and a governance one. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. This question about success, both the determinants, but also the parameters of success. How does success look like? Probably I will also leave it also to all the panelists to deliberate on, so that they could also contribute to this question in terms of really coming up with very concrete indicators when it comes to, okay, I mean, 20 years of scholarship on peace and security has already identified this critical challenge, and the policy debate are also catching up the same vein, that we need to do things differently. Business as usual is not working given the current environment. So what should we do differently? Probably this is something that we really need to continue discussing throughout the panel. Paul, let me come back to the question on external actors. Again, the key discussion in most of the seminars and debate, including the policy debates at the African Union, is that the resurgence of external actors, interference on the continent, and the fact that Africa is becoming more or less a playing field, geopolitical and geostrategic competition. I know, Paul, you have a couple of things to say about this. How could the AU reassert its leadership in terms of crisis management and addressing issues in this context of external interference?
Thanks for that question. I'm very relaxed about this question of external actors. I'm sometimes wonder whether by asking that we imagine that Africa will be exempted from external action. All actors are subjected to these, call it interferences or immixtion in internal affairs. It happens everywhere. This is just how international relations work. So it's neither good nor bad. It's just a reality. And I don't think we should be worried about that. The only thing that worries me is that we always generally mention it in a sense that external involvement is bad. In reality, it reveals the AU's non-preparation, actually. And I can illustrate that with an example. All external actors dealing with the AU generally have an African Union strategy. They come with clear plans, objectives, and what they would like to achieve. On the opposite side, the AU struggles to define its own strategies in partnership with those actors. So I think a bigger effort, we know there have been many efforts in defining AU's partnerships approach and strategy, but this strategy needs to be broken down in individual strategies. We know who are the key partners of the AU, and I think the AU Commission should make a bigger effort together with member states in defining those AU strategies in dealing with them. The AU is now becoming an actor of international policy. That too requires preparation beyond just the G20. The AU is a G20 member, and in reality, even will even be a more important G20 member for the next for the annual meeting in the US, because the second African member will not attend that meeting. It will put the AU on a very on the spot, literally, because now the AU will be the sole African representative, at least for these for that G20 annual meeting. So defining a strategy will actually also give an idea of how the AU sees the interaction of external actors and how it can help frame them in a way that is beneficial to both these external actors and the African Union and its member states. So I'm quite relaxed. External action involvement can only be negative if we are not prepared. And yes, I know that your question also addresses one important dimension that also Ambassador Willie mentioned. It is the famous question of why do external actors sometimes have more leeway in convening African, particularly belligerents or African actors facing tension than African actors? So, but this is a question I would like to return to African member states and the African Union. If it's easier to go to a meeting when the US or Qatar convenes than when it is, I'll take the current chair, Angola, or who knows, Burundi, then this is a question we should be asking to ourselves and not blaming the external actors. It looks like African countries are more eager to or more vulnerable to the leverage that external actors have than the African Union. So maybe it's also a wake-up call that should actually also, and I'll end with that, make us collectively reflect onto what are the incentives for African countries to be at the AU, to be members of the RECs and of the AU. Is there a clear understanding that it is more beneficial to be inside than to be outside? I mean, we're asking this question with regard to what is happening now in West Africa with the creation of the Alliance des États du Sahel. This is probably the biggest challenge that APSA has faced. And it raises the question of what are the concrete incentives to be part of those collective security mechanisms? And in my view, the response is, as you were saying, that it's not necessarily in business as usual, but moving forward, if the incentives are also not of economic nature, if EFCTA does not provide that, in addition to the political incentives, that economic dimension, that it's actually more beneficial to be in the AU, in a REC, because it also provides economic benefit, then I think we might be facing a future of more fragmentation than of cohesion. Thank you.
Ambassador Willie, I gather you'd like to add something on this one.
Non, merci beaucoup. Il a soulevé des questions d'une importance capitale et je pense qu'il a pointé son doigt aux États membres. Et je pense que il a raison sur plusieurs points. Il n'est pas assis comme diplomate et nous sommes des diplomates. Nous avons un langage diplomatique souvent pour essayer de dorloter nos populations. Hein, et nous n'attaquons pas les choses d'une manière crue et véridique comme elle se devrait. Là où je voudrais vous donner raison, c'est sur la dimension de la prévention ou la diplomatie préventive ou l'alerte précoce. Effectivement, notre façon d'agir ne montre pas réellement que nous sommes dans une dynamique de cheminer vers une diplomatie préventive. Parce que nous ne donnons pas les moyens qu'il faut pour le faire. Et tout à l'heure, j'avais évoqué la question de nos priorités. Par exemple, si nous essayons de voir ce que 2025 nous a coûté en termes de réunions et ce que 2025 nous a coûté en termes d'investissement dans les infrastructures ou dans les écoles, disons, pour investir dans la santé et autres, c'est étonnant. Les chiffres parlent d'eux-mêmes. Et d'une manière un peu bousculée, je me suis toujours posé des questions quand le Burundi était membre du Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine. Je disais, le Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine, moi, comme individu, m'a permis de découvrir l'Afrique, de connaître les meilleures plages d'Afrique, de connaître les meilleurs endroits d'Afrique, mais pas où les conflits se trouvent. Ça veut dire que si on veut parler, par exemple, de la crise au Sahel, on cherche un bel endroit, on va à Swakopmund en Namibie, ou on va à Victoria Falls, et on commence à discuter de ce qui se passe à l'est de la RDC ou ailleurs. Alors ça, c'est déjà un paradoxe, c'est paradoxal. Ça veut dire que si nous sommes en train de dépenser beaucoup d'argent, un autre exemple, c'est quand on est capable de dépenser 2 millions de dollars pour un séminaire qui va examiner le nexus entre la paix, la sécurité et le développement, alors que tout le monde, même un enfant de l'école primaire, si vous lui demandez si la paix, la sécurité et le développement sont intimement liés, tout le monde dit oui, mais on est capable de prendre des vols, de payer des billets business et de résider dans des hôtels 5 étoiles et de passer 3 jours à discuter du nexus entre la paix, la sécurité et le développement. Et aucune personne dans la salle ne va soulever un avis contradictoire. Ça veut dire que quelque part, nous avons un souci dans les priorités. Nous commençons à nous lamenter que nos bureaux sont understaffed, que nos bureaux n'ont pas de budget de fonctionnement pour faire la prévention, la diplomatie préventive, au moment où nous sommes en train de dépenser plusieurs millions de dollars pour évoquer des faits qui sont réellement connus de tous. Et une autre chose que je voudrais... oh, stop those started. Voilà, donc c'est que le paradoxe africain ne réside pas dans un déficit de normes, c'est plutôt dans un déficit de mise en œuvre. Nous parlons d'influence extérieure. Vous imaginez les États africains qui ont connu des problèmes, disons, de changement anticonstitutionnel de gouvernement. La démarche africaine, la démarche de leur organisation, c'est d'abord de démolir le pont qui lie l'organisation à ses États membres. C'est de couper le lien ombilical. Alors, quand vous coupez tout lien, comment voulez-vous que ces personnes ou ces États continuent à avoir confiance en leur propre organisation? C'est la raison pour laquelle, quand un acteur externe leur tend la main, mais la tendance, c'est de recevoir, c'est de saisir cette main tendue. Nous le disons dans nos paroles, mais dans l'acte, dans nos actes, nous nous séparons d'eux, comme si c'était des malpropres. Vous imaginez, quand nous tenons notre sommet, par exemple, le sommet ordinaire, tous les partenaires, nos amis, européens et autres, peuvent avoir accès à la salle comme observateurs. Mais allez voir au sommet, il n'y aura pas de Burkina. L'ambassadeur de Burkina Faso ne sera pas là, l'ambassadeur du Mali ne sera pas là, mais c'est son organisation. Mais si on ne peut pas lui donner la parole, pourquoi ne pas l'inviter comme observateur? Donc, ce qui s'est passé dans son pays, lui, comme ambassadeur en poste, n'est pas nécessairement un acte qu'on peut dire entièrement répréhensible parce que nous avons encore un débat à faire. Qu'est-ce que nous appelons changement anticonstitutionnel de gouvernement? Est-ce lorsqu'un militaire entre en jeu ou il peut y avoir d'autres changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement pilotés par des civils? Voilà. Donc, pour clore, pour conclure en fait mon propos, c'est dire que si nous considérons que nous pouvons inviter quelqu'un qui n'est pas de l'organisation et éviter celui qui est de l'organisation, nous créons en la personne un autre sentiment de rejet de l'organisation qui était son organisation. Mais quand nos propres chefs d'État vont aux Nations Unies
à l'Assemblée générale de l'ONU, mais on écoute ce que disent nos frères africains que nous ne voulons pas écouter dans notre propre organisation. Je pense que ça, c'est paradoxal et nous devrions quand même, à un certain moment, attaquer cette question et l'avoir sur la table pour une conversation. Quels sont les mécanismes que nous pouvons mettre en place pour avoir une conversation continuelle avec ces mêmes États membres qui sont en difficulté de fait de changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement, parce que aussi des fois, c'est des populations qui disent « nous prenons les choses en main, nous en avons assez de ce que nous sommes en train de voir ». Quand vous avez un taux de participation de l'ordre de 20%, alors les 80% sont où? Si notre propre organisation va valider ce qui a été décidé par 20% de la population en âge de voter, mais quand les 80% seront dans la rue et qu'il y aura un changement, eh bien, notre organisation sort de son silence et pénalise les 80% qui ont décidé de prendre les choses en main. C'est une conversation à avoir, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Ambassador Willie, and we'd like the conversation to be interactive so that panelists can also interact and challenge with each other. So thank you, Paul, briefly for really for pointing to these schools of thought around this, the review processes. And given the tension between these two approaches, you mentioned the importance of having a middle way or a third way or a middle ground in terms of situating the reform processes. Another critical point you mentioned is about the importance of conflict prevention, which has become the weakest link in the AU, but it's not in the AU, but it is the weakest link also within the United Nations system. As you may recall, when Antonio Guterres took the helm of the United Nations, he took the promotion of conflict prevention as one of his key priorities. How he fared in that regard is an open question. But where, Paul, I would like also to challenge one of the issues you mentioned, namely, yes, the AU might have some challenge in terms of its approach, institutions, resources to conflict prevention, but you also need to be reminded that conflict prevention is the primary prerogatives of the member states. So much of the conflict prevention work takes place at a member state levels. So we can also question the commitment of our member states when it comes to conflict prevention. And then the merger of APSA, both questioning the logic, but also in terms of giving us critical insight in terms of the process, how the process of the merger should balance the two sides of the architecture in terms of resource, institutions, and so on and so on. Finally, your question on external actors is also very critical. So in the interest of time, I will move directly to Prof. Tim. I'm going to ask you questions on two of your favorite topics. One of them is the fact that the AU reform initiatives, they don't take place in a vacuum. They take place within the context of the global multilateral discussion, which we are seeing that it's seeing a lot of unsettling and unraveling. So how can the AU's review of its peace, security, and governance frameworks can be strategically linked with broader discussions and efforts on the reform of the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, to strengthen multilateral coherence, subsidiarity, and burden sharing? We heard you in a number of events making a very audacious proposal. So if you can just elaborate how the AU's reform processes can be tied to the broader discussion on the reform of the EU. And the second question is, I think much of, at least most of the analysis on the AU reforms dating back 2017, there are a number of issues identified. One critical issue is the lack of inclusion of citizens. So what are the existing avenues for broader inclusion of citizens, think tanks, and civil society in terms of supporting the current review processes, but most importantly also for the promotion of early warning, conflict prevention, mediation, and peace building? The latter question is particularly important for the organizers of this seminar. ISS, IPSS, and with contribution from Amani. All of them are members of the Net for Peace, the network of think tanks for peace. So this is a critical question. How can the Net for Peace support these initiatives? This is also a question for Letty and the others in the room as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dawit, and also to the ISS, Dr. Paul Simon Handy and his team, all the ISS colleagues here, IPSS, my sister Letty. IPSS has been anchoring quite a few important dialogues as well. The Tana High-Level Forum remains one. And I was asking Letty if she's going to do one this year. She said, yes, why not? So I look forward to that as well. Let me also register the fact that I am a staunch feminist as a husband and the father of a teenage girl. This panel definitely needed to be a little bit more gender balanced. But I know there was an attempt to, because I saw previous programs and there were women, and then eventually, they had to pull out. But I hope the ladies in the audience are going to redress this imbalance of power by asking very pointed questions. So coming to the questions you've posed, let me start with the civil society inclusion. Some of these issues we're discussing now, we used to discuss 20 years ago. It might sound shocking. I was involved in helping to establish the ISS office in Addis Ababa in 2007, 2008, and we were asking precisely the same questions. Nothing has changed. So what are we doing wrong? I think it's very important for us to put this question on the table. And I feel the biggest, let me say, failure of the African Union has really been its ability to connect with the people of Africa, the civil society, the think tanks, the social movements. There is a summit coming up. It will be ambassadors, ministers, and heads of state. And the citizens will be on the outside looking in. I hope we can redress that as well. And Ambassador Willie will be chairing the AU this year. So hopefully we can come up with creative ideas how civil society can also not just observe, but actually come and speak directly to the leaders. I know you're worried about job security. I can see how this can be career limiting, but in the absence of connecting with African people, I think we have a process that's happening at a high level, and we have the people on the ground that are suffering. The conflict in Sudan, the crisis in Sahel, Mozambique, Somalia, the tensions around elections we've seen in a number of countries, Tanzania, Uganda, right? We know this, it's in the news. It's not state secret. So the challenge really becomes, how can we connect the African Union more directly to the African people? And I must commend the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankole, who came up with the concept of the African Union Network of Think Tanks for Peace, of which Dr. Dawit has mentioned, ISS, IPSS, Amani, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation are all members of this network. But again, that is more providing analysis and then hoping that the leaders will take the right decisions. I think we need to look for a much more direct way of engaging with our leaders, our political decision makers in meetings of the African Union. That's something for us to apply our minds to, but also in assisting in the technical support of the work being done. There are so many think tanks, so many NGOs working on peace, security across the African continent. Are they connecting to the work of the African Union at a high level? Are they connecting to the work of the United Nations at a high level? So for me, I think that is a very profound issue that we need to address, to bring the people closer to the union, to make the union a union of the people, rather than a union of essentially the heads of state. I think we need to move beyond that now if we're going to address these issues that we have been discussing for the last 20 years or so. And then linked to that is the current global order that we're in. I think we are in an exceptionally fraught space. The title of this discussion is the Fraying Global Order. It is being dismantled. We've seen the actions of a number of countries that are actually tearing down the United Nations Charter and are taking, some would say, a sledgehammer to the system and saying that the post-World War II order is now obsolete. Some are even saying it has been weaponized against them in the global north. We followed the discussions in Davos recently, and I just want to shout out to the Canadian Prime Minister, who actually made a very pivotal speech about the rupture that is real, but also he exposed the lie of the so-called rules-based order. He said, we believed this only when it didn't affect us. Until Greenland was affected, then all of a sudden, something is up. The world is changing. And on that, I think the AU reforms come at an interesting time. The AU needs to reform itself. The UN clearly needs to reform itself. AU reforms, I'm hopeful. Always, I'm an idealist. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. I hope that they will take the organization into a new level of operation and a new focus, particularly of linking up with the people of Africa. This is not the first set of reforms we've done. 2016, we had the reforms that were led by President Paul Kagame. Those reforms regrettably did not lead to the type of efficiencies that we would have liked within the AU. And now we're essentially in a situation where we're talking about reforms of reforms. That's where we are today. And so I hope the leadership at the AU will be taking this into account and pushing the agenda forward. At the global level, I think the United Nations system as a whole is reaching a breaking point. And the fact that Africa was not as represented in the founding of the United Nations, there were only 3 countries, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Liberia, and apartheid South Africa, we often don't count. And now where we are 80 years plus, it is time to rethink the United Nations system, to renew the United Nations system, and to transform multilateralism to suit the 21st century. Because currently what we have is not working. The United Nations Security Council clearly is no longer functional, it's dysfunctional. We can see in the number of conflicts happening around the world. We also know that P5 members are applying their own whim and invading and attacking countries. Clearly the system is broken. So I don't think we should be talking about reforming the United Nations Security Council anymore. I think the Titanic is sinking. Even if you move the deck chairs around the Titanic, you're still going to end up sinking. So we need to start thinking outside the box. And there's a very little known provision in the United Nations Charter, which the founders of the United Nations actually, in their wisdom, knew that this organization will get to a point where it either needs to renew itself or it will die a slow death. And that is Article 109 of the United Nations Charter, which I'm sure the majority of you in this room are not familiar with. And that is not because it's a secret. It's just because most governments don't like talking about it. There's a slight fear around Article 109, whether we should open up the Charter for discussion. The Article 109 calls for a general conference to review the United Nations system. The whole United Nations, not just the Security Council. And I think we're at that point. And because Africa's historical exclusion, which was an injustice, and given the theme of the year last year, justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations, and I acknowledge Ambassador Al-Jawali, who's here from CEDAW, leading the work on this in the AU. And now we have a decade of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. And our European brothers and sisters are slowly coming around to this issue. It featured in the final document issued by the AU-EU summit in Luanda, Angola last year. It's one of the final paragraphs of the statement, joint statement. So it's good to see that we have at least a common foundation to begin this discussion around reparations. within the context of reparations, restitution for Africa's historical exclusion from the multilateral system is key. It's essentially what the AU has been saying from the beginning, even further than that. The OEU, 1963, made similar claims. That's almost 60 plus years that we've been saying this. So I think this is where we are now. And I encourage you to read Article 109 to see how your own governments can support this initiative. I will hopefully be able to rely on the support of Ambassador Willie here as the chair of the AU for the next year to put this item on the agenda, Ambassador. We can come and have discussions with the AU PRC and any concerns we can address. The biggest concern is we cannot open up the charter now because the crazies are in the process of dismantling the multilateral system. So if you open up the charter, they'll make it worse and they'll destroy the whole thing. There'll be nothing left. That's the biggest fear. But in fact, there is nothing coming to save you. I just said the United Nations Security Council is not working. It's not intervening in Sudan. It's not intervening in Sahel. It's not coming to Somalia anymore. So it is broken. You got to fix it. You got to make a decision how we're going to fix it. We can do that collectively, where we have a broad-ranging discussion. The general conference will not happen overnight. It will happen over 2-3 years. We hope, again, the experts will be involved in engaging with this. So it's not something that's going to solve Sudan crisis tomorrow. Article 109 will be for future generations to ensure that there is no full-scale invasion of Ukraine, no genocide in Gaza, as reported by the International Independent Commission on Occupied Territories, led by Judge Navi Pillay of South Africa. It's a formal document, you can download it. Is to prevent Sudan from happening again. Okay, this is where we need to start looking towards and thinking slightly outside the box. And the African Union, I believe, as the largest grouping of countries at the United Nations, has tremendous social power, convening power to influence this debate. Only if we operate as one, if we tap into the spirit of Pan-Africanism. We haven't even mentioned that. Pan-Africanism at the heads of state level, but we need to see Pan-Africanism of the people as well to help lift this continent out of the current crisis it's in. We have a full house today. It's wonderful to see how much interest there is. This is definitely a landmark event, and I congratulate ISS and IPSS. Our friends from outside of Africa are here to listen, but I hope also to support us in this quest as we begin to transform the multilateral system for the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tim. 2 points stand out. One is a very stark wake-up call or reminder for reinventing the United Nations or to reform it. And second one is to making sure that the AU would remain a union of the citizens, but not just exclusively for the leaders. And then also your point about the Pan-African, making sure that it becomes Pan-African of the people. Paul would like to address some of the points you mentioned. I know Tim is giving me a signal that we need to move into the interactive session. We cannot say no to Paul for good reason. Just 1 minute, Paul.
Thanks. I won't be long. Just 1 minute to challenge my friend and colleague, Tim, a very good friend. I'm just wondering, do you fix the UN, our collective good, by just adding more people in the highest decision-making body? This is something we refer to in international relations as input legitimacy. You legitimate a body by working on its representation, making sure that it's representative of everybody you have, regardless of the results, of the efficiency. But there's another aspect which looks at the results. What representation do I need to get the type of result I want on the ground? This is the output legitimacy, the legitimacy that you get from actually achieving certain objectives. It looks to me that the debate about African representation in the UN Security Council is often focused almost exclusively on the input legitimacy. You can also break an organ by just adding more people. This is my controversial take on that.
Very, very controversial indeed. We'll continue engaging it throughout the remaining minutes of the seminar. With this, I'll open the floor first to those in the room. If you have any question, I see Hosni, I see another hand here. Please limit your questions maximum to 2 minutes. Hosni and another. Okay. Excuse me, sir. Yes, please give the floor first to the colleague behind, and then I'll give you the floor, sir.
Thank you so much, Dawit and panelists. Mine is going to be very brief, starting this importance of this session that it's coming in the aftermath of the Davos funeral for the rules-based order, and also the inauguration of the Peace Board in Davos as well, Global Peace Board. I congratulate Ambassador Willie for taking over the presidency of the PRC and wish you all the best. My name is Hosni from Sudan Embassy. I would like to reflect on the priorities that you raised in your intervention, including putting the terrorism and reforms before many others. For us now, from the ongoing incidents in the continent, there is more perils than terrorism now, called middle power competition in the continent. We need to have this summit to boost African immunity against foreign intervention, specifically middle powers competition, Sahel region, Horn of Africa, Middle and Central Africa. How could you address that during your presidency to the PRC and the Union? And also would like to give a suggestion to leave this theme of the year to the technical departments and agencies with the sponsorship from the political leadership of the presidency of the Union, while concentrating more on political and geopolitical issues challenging the continent, including the threat of dividing the United Countries in the Africa. For us now, in Africa, this is very difficult moments for the continent. Let me disagree with the concept of underestimating the foreign intervention. That is against two African concepts. The first one is the concept of Pan-Africanism. The second one, the concept of the African solutions to the African problems. So even in its mild understanding of Dr. Solomon, if he's here, to that concept. So that's dangerous, dividing the continent, threatening the unity and stability of the countries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's finish this side and then we'll come to this side.
Thank you very much, ISS and the panelists for this very important discussion points. My name is Girma Hailu. I am a consultant in the same area. What I want to ask the panelists basically is their reflection on the partnership with the external factors as it relates to the EU reforms that's underway. The external factors, as we know them, have separate interests. I mean, take big or, the middle external partners that are supporting the activities of the EU as we know them. So how could a strategy that would address the different interests of the different partners be prepared by the African Union, because now it's an opportune moment, as we know, there is a reform. APSA and AGA are under consideration. So what would be the approach and the strategy that could be taken in this evolving different, interests of the external partners? Thank you.
This side. The back.
Thank you very much. My name is Alamayo. I'm research fellow at IPSS. My question is to the second speaker. I feel that the global order is evolving while Africa is facing excessive external intervention. Countries, particularly in East Africa, including Sudan, are becoming spaces for the proxy war. I feel that African Union remains stagnant in reforming itself and going along with the evolving global order. As we know that one of the principles of the African Union is silencing the gun in the continent. So my question is that why does African Union fail to stop conflict in the continent? And why does the African Union could not move beyond suspending unconstitutional regime change in the continent? Thank you very much.
One final question here. This side.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brukas Chala, Working Executive Director at the African East Forum. My question is specifically to Ambassador of Burundi. You were mentioning about the 3 pillars on the upcoming African Union Year of the Team. And the last pillar was African Renaissance through innovation and through capacity building through women and youth. For just to make it more practical and representing the youth community here in Ethiopia, what are the strategies or the programs you are looking for to really implement capacity building for women and the youth? Because most of time, women and youth used as a word, to complement meetings and also reporters, we include users, but really in practical way. Also, Professor was saying direct engagement of the civil society and users in your convenings and meetings. And how are you planning to do that as you are chairing the upcoming African Union, and also what we can help regarding on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's limit the questions for now, but we can batch some of the questions that we're receiving. For example, the question on current limitation in terms of silencing the guns on the continent. There is an online question which talks about what concrete roles or what are the biggest gap between policy commitments and implementation at national and regional levels, and how can the AU and member states close this gap in practice when it comes to addressing conflicts? There is also a question on how to enhance the awareness of APSA across the continent, to the person on the street, to the citizens. How do you raise awareness on this one? And then the question, there is also a similar question on youth inclusion. Young people are often described as both victims and drivers of insecurity. What concrete roles should African governments and regional bodies give youth in conflict prevention, peace building, security sector reform beyond consultation? I think the operative term is beyond consultation and nominal representation. Over to you, panelists. Let me start with Ambassador Willy.
Merci beaucoup de commencer par moi. Les questions sont de très bonnes questions et qui nous poussent à cette fois-ci aller vers des réponses concrètes. Je vais commencer par mon frère du Soudan. Bien entendu, qui évoque des questions de diviser l'Afrique et ses pays, le continent, et aussi les interventions extérieures qu'on ne peut pas empêcher, effectivement. Vous savez, toutes ces interventions sont guidées par les intérêts. Et ces intérêts, vous savez, il n'y a pas, comme on dit, il n'y a pas d'amitié entre États ou pays, ce sont les intérêts qui gouvernent. Et raison pour laquelle, même quand nous nous rencontrons entre diplomates, nous disons que nous avons discuté, évoqué des questions d'intérêt commun. Effectivement, c'est des intérêts. Et maintenant, au XXIe siècle, nous devrions parler d'intérêts partagés. L'Afrique reste un continent divisé. D'abord, lui-même, nous nous divisons. Théoriquement, nous disons que l'union fait la force, mais dans la pratique, cette union ne fait pas la force. Nous avons fait des blocs régionaux pour essayer d'avancer vers des blocs solides, mais même à l'intérieur de ces blocs régionaux, nous sommes très divisés. Quand j'étais encore étudiant, j'avais des idées panafricanistes et dans les discussions, dans les débats, je disais, je ne peux pas comprendre comment le Burundi et le Rwanda sont deux pays différents. Nous avons la même configuration sociologique, nous parlons la même langue, nous avons la même culture, les mêmes valeurs, nous nous ressemblons, nous portons les mêmes noms, mais nous sommes deux pays différents. Si le Burundi et le Rwanda, je prends un exemple de mon pays, si le Burundi et le Rwanda se mettaient ensemble, ils pourraient former un bloc solide. Mais chaque pays va s'armer jusqu'à tirer jusqu'à l'océan. Chaque pays va avoir un gouvernement, il y a un parlement, etc. Nous aurons plusieurs représentations dans tous les pays. Ça coûte beaucoup d'argent. Comment les deux Congos ne peuvent pas s'unir? Comment, etc. Donc, il y a des pays qui pourraient se dire, l'union fait la force, allons ensemble. C'est possible. Mais malheureusement, cela, jusqu'à ce jour, ne devient pas possible et nous continuons à blâmer les Occidentaux en disant c'est eux qui viennent nous diviser. Mais nous avons été à l'école, nous avons étudié et nous nous disons panafricanistes, mais il nous est difficile de mettre en valeur nos propres idées panafricanistes. Il a parlé de société civile, professeur, et c'est très intéressant. J'ai toujours aimé une discussion sur la société civile. Mais la société civile, nous avons évolué vers une considération de société civile comme une partie de certaines organisations. Mais la société civile, c'est l'ensemble de toutes ces populations qui ne font pas partie des gouvernants. Mais nous ne donnons pas la parole à cette société civile. Nous l'écartons dans la gestion des affaires qui les concernent. Et il a bien dit, il faut leur donner la parole. Je pense que nous avancerons vers cette conversation et voir comment le Burundi pourrait amener ça. Alors, en ce qui concerne la stratégie que l'Union africaine pourrait mettre en jeu, en ce qui concerne les partenariats, par exemple, vous savez que l'Afrique elle-même s'est mise dans un engrenage dangereux. Un bloc d'une 50aine de pays peut faire un partenariat avec un seul pays. Et tout le monde est, comme qui dirait, convoqué, tous les chefs d'État convoqués vers un autre pays. Je ne vais pas mentionner les pays, mais ce n'est pas d'égal à égal. Et on ne pourrait pas prendre une économie burundaise et la mettre en compétition avec une économie chinoise, par exemple, en disant, voilà, il y a un partenariat entre ce pays et l'autre, etc. Et maintenant, quand c'est tous ces pays qui sont convoqués pour aller vers un seul pays, alors que nous parlons de souveraineté égale des États, quelque part, nous-mêmes, nous nous mettons dans un engrenage dangereux qui montre que nous sommes très divisés. Et il nous est difficile aussi d'avoir un langage commun, d'avoir une position commune sur des positions qui pourraient développer notre propre continent. Je pense que c'est une conversation à avoir qu'on ne pourrait pas, on ne pourrait pas avoir des solutions aujourd'hui, mais les générations naissantes, ces générations devraient penser à l'Afrique comme une Afrique une et indivisible, comme les pères fondateurs de l'OUA, qui avaient des idéaux qui devaient nous amener vers un continent intégré, un continent uni et solidaire. Mais il m'est difficile d'aller dans des pays africains. Il m'est difficile, même en tant qu'ambassadeur, d'avoir des visas, alors que
Quand je demande un visa Schengen, on me donne 2 ans. Quand je demande un visa ailleurs, on me donne plusieurs années. Mais si je demande à un pays africain, frère, on me dit la réunion, ce sera pour combien de jours? On me donne 3 jours de visa. Donc, il faut, même si je tombe malade, je serai un illégal. Donc, il faut sortir rapidement. Je pense que c'est une conversation à tenir. Et quand vous parlez de proxy wars, c'est justement parce que nous ouvrons les portes. L'Afrique, à l'époque de l'esclavage, c'était des matières premières qu'on venait chercher à l'état brut, qu'on amenait à la mer et qu'on transportait à l'extérieur. Mais jusqu'à ce jour, nous sommes en train d'exporter nos matières premières à l'état brut, exactement comme on faisait à l'ère de l'esclavage et de la colonisation, et on les transporte vers les ports et on les met dans les conteneurs pour partir à l'extérieur du continent. Et quand ça revient encore plus cher. Comment voulez-vous que les pays qui sont nantis en matière première puissent connaître la paix au moment où il y a un business derrière? Donc, quelque part, si je porte un iPhone, si je porte, j'utilise ces outils, je les achète à plus cher à partir des matières premières qui ont été prises soit à titre gratuit, ou à très moins cher sur mon continent. La dernière réunion, alors l'Union africaine, elle est affaiblie en tant qu'organisation. Je pense que dans le fonctionnement, dans la configuration de l'Union africaine, il y a déjà une faiblesse organisationnelle et structurelle. L'Union africaine, si je vous donne un exemple, nous avons essayé, nous avons un partenariat entre l'Union africaine et l'Union européenne. Mais c'est deux blocs complètement différents. L'Union africaine, quand vous prenez le président de la Commission, c'est un serviteur des États membres. C'est le COREP qui décide. Il ne décide pas, il exécute. Et maintenant, comment voulez-vous que cette organisation puisse amener des stratégies qui peuvent sauver le continent au moment où les États membres eux-mêmes sont divisés sur de petites considérations d'intérêts sectaires et égoïstes qui ne peuvent pas harmoniser leur violon pour cheminer droit vers la stabilité du continent. Ça devient très difficile. Donc, je pense que cette réforme organisationnelle et structurelle de l'Union africaine devrait entrer en profondeur, comme disait le professeur. Maintenant, on est en train d'aller vers la restructuration de la structure, la réforme de la réforme. La mise en œuvre de cette réforme devient quasiment difficile, donc il faut réformer cette réforme. Et enfin, le jeune parle de cette initiative. L'initiative s'appelle ARISE, African Renaissance through Innovation, Skills Development and Empowerment of Youth and Women. Cette initiative est liée en grande partie à l'éducation. Nous pensons qu'un continent éduqué, c'est un continent qui peut être plus stable. Et tout ce que nous avons comme initiative, que ce soit des initiatives de paix et de sécurité, des initiatives de santé, des initiatives de développement, si ça ne passe pas par l'éducation, nos jeunes générations ne peuvent pas tenir en main les destinées de leur continent. Alors, le développement des compétences, c'est très important. Et l'autonomisation des jeunes et des femmes, c'est très important. Alors, il y a plusieurs initiatives. Et ces initiatives se vouent une compétition. Par exemple, il y a l'agenda jeunesse, paix et sécurité de l'Union africaine, dont le champion, c'est le président du Burundi. Et il y a un dialogue continental qui se tient chaque année à Bujumbura. Mais il y a aussi l'initiative Energize Africa de Oda Nepat, qui est beaucoup plus dans l'employabilité des jeunes. Il y a l'initiative 1 Million Next Level de la Commission de l'Union africaine, qui est beaucoup plus pour pousser les jeunes à pouvoir justement aller vers l'emploi et développer des compétences, etc. Finalement, nous trouvons nous tous en train de chercher des financements chez les mêmes personnes, c'est les mêmes organisations. comme si c'était vraiment compétitif. Et vous dites, Images Africa a demandé un financement pour organiser une activité. L'agenda jeunesse, paix et sécurité demande un financement pour la même chose. Et d'autres initiatives dans les États et dans les organisations, dans les REX, ou les mécanismes régionaux, tout ça, ça devrait aller converger vers les objectifs communs d'autonomisation des jeunes et des femmes. Alors, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous voulons organiser au mois d'août un grand rassemblement qui peut amener toutes ces initiatives de jeunes, ainsi que l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, pour une conversation une et avoir des recommandations dans le sens d'aller vers, disons, la rationalisation de nos actions et la mise en œuvre des décisions qui ont été déjà prises. Et vous savez que 2026 coïncide avec le 20e anniversaire de l'adoption de la Charte africaine de la jeunesse. Donc, le moment est bien choisi pour avoir une conversation, se dire où est-ce qu'on est, d'où on vient et où est-ce qu'on va. Merci. Je m'excuse, j'ai été long. C'est une des formations professionnelles du passé.
And then, thank you very much, Ambassador Willie, Professor Tim.
Okay, thank you so much. Just very quickly, well, Ambassador Willie was discussing when he was a student, a staunch Pan-Africanist that saw the unification of Burundi, Rwanda, Congo-Brazza. I was beginning to feel he was making a very strong argument for the alliance of Central African states along the lines of the alliance of the Sahelian states. So perhaps this is something we need to pick up on. But I think the basic point you're trying to make is that we need to move beyond these constructions, which come from a European concept, the Westphalian sovereignty, 1648. Europe is moving on with the European Union, creating a supranational governance system. We are still stuck with these 55 states that were in part imposed in the 1885 Berlin Conference. And it's a hangover. We're struggling to recover from it. But listening to Ambassador Willie, and I hope he will use his chair to curate conversations around this deepening integration of the African continent. Let me speak very quickly relating to the African Ezulwini consensus and the Security Council reform. I believe the time has come to move beyond Ezulwini as well and to think outside the box. There is a AUC10 model that was developed last year in Lusaka, but I think the way the world has shifted now, there is no point in joining a Security Council that is actually sinking. We're just all going to end up sink together. So I think we need to also think outside the box beyond Ezulwini. And very quickly on funding, the competition around funding. I don't think Africa should continue putting out a begging bowl to our external partners. I think it's time to get a little bit serious with ourselves and to also challenge ourselves. One of the ideas that was discussed at the high-level review of governance, policy, peace and security policy frameworks was, for example, increasing the African Union levy, or even establishing an African Union levy. Let's say exclusively for governance, peace and security. We ask all 55 African governments to send 5% of their defense budgets to a joint kitty of the African Union that is independently monitored and so on and so forth. 5% of, we spend $52 billion a year on military on the African continent. 5% of that is about 2.5 billion US. We have the money. The challenge, and you can feel it in the room, the ambassadors, the member states of the AU would balk at such an idea of taking 5% of their own defense budget and putting it to work in the interests of the continent. And why is that fear? Because we've always relied on external funding. We need to wean ourselves out of this addiction. It is a form of addiction. And if we're serious, we need to put our money on the table. 5% is not much of your defense budgets. It's fewer parades, military parades, fewer this and that. And also for troop contributing countries to peace support operations. For example, if we need a peace support operation in Sudan, the countries that are contributing troops and logistics and all the rest of it can actually claim their 5% from that. So it's in-kind contribution to Africa's own peace and security operations. It's a strange concept, but we shouldn't dismiss it offhand. I know ambassadors will balk putting this idea to their ministers and heads of state, but this is the moment of courage. I will hope you will transmit this information next week to your bosses. Another idea is taxing 1% of incoming of air tickets, 1% incoming flights. Another idea is 1% financial transaction in the African continental free trade area. So we're not lacking in ideas. We're not lacking in funding. And on the theme of Pan-Africanism and working together, there is a document called the African Common Defense and Security Policy, which again, many of you don't know about. It's unfortunate that it's also on the shelf, gathering dust. But I think we need to revive this document. It has a lot to say about Africa working as one to engage the rest of the world. And a simple idea, which is a low-hanging fruit, is to have a high representative for Africa's common defense and security policy, who will go to popularize this policy, but also encourage African countries to work together, to stand together in the face of the fraying global order. And maybe Ambassador Willie will put the proposal on the table for a high representative for common defense and security policy. And then he might eventually become the high representative for common defense and security policy. Thank you. It's a job for you.
Paul, would you like to come in? No. Okay. So, one round. Okay.
So from our online participants, we have some questions. I'll read everything and then maybe the panelists can take just a few seconds, minutes to respond to everything at once. So the first one says, and I quote, "Many African peace and security frameworks exist, yet conflict persists." I think we've said that already. What are the biggest gaps between policy commitments and implementations at national and regional levels? And how can AU, REX, and member states close these gaps in practice? The second one, how can we enhance the awareness of APSA across the continent? Because most Africans don't know about it. The third question, what concrete roles should African governments and regional bodies give the African youth in conflict prevention, peace building, and security sector reforms beyond consultation? And then the last question, which I'll take, what are the biggest gaps between, okay, no, we asked that already. Yeah, so those three questions. Thank you.
Yeah, some of these questions have been already addressed already. So participant, if there is no one, if there is, okay. Liz.
Thank you. I'm just responding to Tim's suggestion that there should be some female questions from the floor. I have two questions, one for Ambassador Nyamitwe. It sounded, Ambassador, while you were speaking, as if you are arguing for an opening up of the discussion on unconstitutional change of government and what it means. Is that something that is being envisaged? I mean, the Loma Convention or the African Charter, we see with the accepting back into the AU of Gabon and Guinea very recently that, yeah, I mean, some people think that there has been some kind of change, let's say, a more pragmatic approach to that. So that's my one question. The other question to my other former colleagues about who should lead this response to the global rupture on the African continent. We've had fantastic discussions, even last year, the Tana Forum, the Chatham House discussions, and a lot of intellectuals are writing about it. But we don't see, and maybe at the African Union Summit now, we'll see some statements. Former South African ambassador to the UN that you both know very well recently said at a discussion we had in Johannesburg that in 1990, when there was the fall of the Berlin Wall, the OAU got together, the leaders convened a discussion to forge a response by the African continent to this rupture. And I was wondering how you see whether it should be 4, 5 big influential African states. Can we revive that concept, how the African Union was actually created? Or what mechanisms can be used? Some said the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Ghana should have convened a discussion about punitive tariffs. That's it. Sorry, David.
Je vous remercie encore une fois alors pour tous les organisateurs. Une réunion qui, je pense, voilà, convenue à un temps qui est bien important, juste une semaine du sommet africain. Alors, mon cher frère, Excellence ambassadeur Willy, avec la présidence entrante du Burundi, quel rôle voyez-vous pour le diaspora d'une perspective de réforme? On parle toujours voilà, du rôle important, contribution importante du diaspora, mais si on le voit d'une perspective de réforme, y a-t-il des réformes que la présidence entrante du Burundi voit pour voilà, élargir le rôle de diaspora? And for my dear brother, Professor Tim Murthy, you've been an advocate for Article 109 within a broader reform of the UN. And of course, any reform of the UN will impact the AU and vice versa. I was wondering, how do you relate, because you did mention the theme of the year, which is becoming the theme of the decade in a week or so. How does that relate to the repeated now call for global structural reparations? So how can Article 109 and reform of the EU of the UN be seen from a global structure reparations perspective? Thank you very much, and apologies for my voice, but I hope I was audible still. Thank you.
Sorry, at the back bottom. I will come back to you.
Thank you very much. My question is to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Burundi. We've recently seen that the Peace and Security Council, the African Union Peace and Security Council, has shown a shift towards a more securitized approach towards early warning information, receiving information from more the police, military actors, as opposed to the early warning, the continental early warning system, which the PSC protocol established and which it requires to provide early warning information and analysis to the PSC. And it also, I think, provides a more human security approach. So I'm trying to understand if you can explain the rationale for this shift, and will this envisaged reform adopt this shift or move towards a more human security approach? And what would be the role of the Qs in this reform? Thank you.
One final question. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I share the sentiments of Prof. Tim about an only male panel. And second, my questions, we are observing more and more the contempt or disregard of international norms and from those who championed them in the beginning, in the first place. And as well as the crisis in multilateralism. So how are these issues shaping the current reforms? And specifically to Ambassador Willie, how are these issues going to shift the discourse throughout your chairmanship? Thank you.
Let's take one final question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have a comment. My name is Branu. I'm research fellow at IPSS. My question goes to Professor Timmy. A comment and question. I think the rupture at the global level is not only at the global system, it's a rupture at the national and continental, plus even at the sub-national system. So I think we are also experiencing that. Second, my question is, do you think the African Union are capable of reforming itself in the midst of ruptures that is happening within the nation, again, also within the regional dimensions as well? And what would be the entry point for the reform if we are able to do so? Thank you.
Thank you. Any taker for the questions? So let's start with Paul.
D'accord, rapidement. Merci.
2 minutes.
OK, thank you. En 2 minutes, d'abord, je vais dire que j'étais sûr de créer une polémique quand j'ai évoqué la question du débat, d'une conversation autour des changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement. Et c'est des pensées que j'assume. Quand je dis, si nous sommes capables d'inviter des observateurs dans les enceintes de l'Union africaine et que les autres n'ont même pas le droit d'arriver même au portail et de dire des salutations, c'est quand même un problème. Donc, les gens devraient entrer aussi et suivre les discours. Parce que c'est leur organisation et figurez-vous qu'ils continuent à cotiser. Ils continuent à verser leurs cotisations. Par exemple, je sais bien que le Mali, par exemple, a versé toutes ses cotisations. Donc, ils sont suspendus, oui, mais ne sont pas exclus de l'organisation, mais nous agissons comme s'ils en étaient exclus. Et c'est ça qui pousse à un certain moment un rejet de ces mêmes pays, de tout ce qui peut être comme bons offices de l'organisation, l'Union africaine. Et vous avez entendu l'Union africaine souvent se lamenter qu'il est mis de côté. Nous voudrions aussi avoir une place. Nous voudrions participer, comme si ce n'était pas leur devoir à la première place. C'est ça le devoir. Mais comme dans nos agissements, c'est comme si nous les avions rejetés, il y a une difficulté. Donc, je n'ouvre pas cette conversation dans le sens de dire nous devrions accepter les changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement, mais de se dire qu'est-ce que nous appelons changement anticonstitutionnel de gouvernement? C'est seulement quand un militaire vient. Parce que, vous savez, l'OUA était beaucoup plus dans une logique de non-ingérence. Mais l'Union africaine a innové et a beaucoup plus amené la non-indifférence. Quand nous parlons de non-indifférence, c'est quand il y a seulement des massacres, on dit voilà, génocide, etc. Mais la non-indifférence devrait aussi impliquer la gouvernance, l'accompagnement de ces pays. Quand nous voyons des frustrations monter, est-ce que nous devrions réellement être indifférents par rapport à ceux qui kidnappent, par exemple, le pouvoir au détriment des populations? Et quand les populations rentrent dans la rue, vous savez, la rue ne prend jamais le pouvoir. La rue peut déstabiliser. Il y aura toujours des gens qui peuvent récupérer ce pouvoir parce que la rue est dans les gens sont dans la rue. Voilà, donc j'ai déjà fini ma première minute. La deuxième minute, je vais répondre à l'ambassadeur Amr sur les questions, le rôle de la diaspora, la réforme.
Oui, justement, parce que les diasporas africaines contribuent beaucoup pour stabiliser même nos économies. Nous devons travailler avec la diaspora. Vous savez, il y a une conversation quand même multiforme. Nous, quand nous parlons de diaspora en tant qu'Union africaine, c'est ceux qui sont en dehors du continent. Mais au niveau des États membres, c'est ceux qui sont en dehors des États. Ça veut dire que ceux qui vivent en Éthiopie constituent déjà une diaspora pour le Burundi, mais ne sont pas une diaspora par rapport à l'Union africaine. Donc, je pense que nous devrions mener cette conversation pour voir qui est diaspora, qui ne l'est pas. Un autre aspect, c'est qu'il y en a qui ne sont pas des gens catégorisés comme diaspora, mais réfugiés. Nous avons, par exemple, dans notre juridiction, si je prends ceux qui sont au Sud-Soudan, nous avons ceux qui y sont comme diaspora, qui travaillent, et ceux qui y sont comme réfugiés, qui ne peuvent même pas être en contact avec leur mission diplomatique parce qu'ils sont réfugiés. Donc, nous allons, et ceux qui sont en Occident, il y en a qui y sont comme réfugiés et d'autres qui sont comme diaspora. Il y a une conversation qu'on devrait avoir, c'est la raison pour laquelle je vous avais demandé rendez-vous pour pouvoir éclairer ma lanterne. Pour AU, PSC, ce changement, le shift qu'il y a, alors je n'ai pas cette information, mais la seule chose que je sais, c'est qu'il y a une conversation déjà au niveau de la protection des civils. La protection des civils, il faut y avoir une conversation, un contact permanent avec les armées. Maintenant, quand il y a des bombardements, par exemple, pour aller attaquer des rebelles, mais vous devez aussi discuter avec l'armée pour savoir comment les civils vont être protégés dans cette démarche d'aller lutter contre le terrorisme. Mais on pourra peut-être continuer la conversation. La crise du multilatéralisme évoquée par ma sœur, comment est-ce que cela va impacter lors de la présidence burundaise? Je vous dis, la présidence burundaise vient au moment où l'ordre mondial est en difficulté, où le multilatéralisme dans sa globalité est en difficulté. Et tout ça va s'amener, s'immiscer dans la conversation. Vous savez, avec la reconnaissance par Israël de Somaliland, ça va s'amener de la conversation, le kidnapping d'un chef d'État en fonction, et où les attaques par-ci, par-là, ou même une démarche qui semble ignorer le développement. Maintenant, il y a certaines puissances qui s'occupent seulement de paix et de sécurité et qui lient ça avec le business. On ne parle plus de nexus paix, sécurité, développement. C'est beaucoup plus sécurité et business. Hein? Ces conversations, vous les avez. Je n'ai pas besoin d'entrer en détail. Et je pense que tout ça, ce sera des challenges auxquels le Burundi aura à faire face. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, ambassadeur. Je voudrais aborder la question posée par ma collègue et amie Liesel sur qui devrait prendre le lead en Afrique en matière de réponse aux changements mondiaux. J'ai entendu cette discussion, j'ai entendu dire qu'il faudrait littéralement répéter la solution qui avait été trouvée dans les années 90, convoquer une réunion et puis redéfinir l'Union africaine, la position de l'Afrique. Je pense que les moments sont différents. Les moments sont très différents. Dans les années 90, l'Union africaine a pu s'engouffrer dans une brèche qui avait déjà été ouverte par les Nations unies. Le fameux agenda de la paix de l'ancien secrétaire général Boutros Ghali avait ouvert une brèche. Et quand on voit l'architecture de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine, elle est littéralement une copie de l'agenda pour la paix. Et je pense que c'est une bonne copie que l'Union africaine, que les architectes de APSA ont su adapter au contexte africain, notamment avec l'innovation, à mon avis, de justement une subsidiarité à 3 niveaux, au niveau continental, régional et étatique. Ce n'est pas juste une copie de la subsidiarité européenne qui est à 2 échelles, mais en Afrique, on a ajouté une 3e et c'est une vraie innovation. Alors, qui devrait prendre cette responsabilité? Est-ce que c'est les fameux, c'est les États importants au niveau des régions, les fameux hégémones, comme on les appelle? Alors, en ce moment, les hégémones sont en très mauvaise position. Dans les régions où on en a un, en Afrique australe, en Afrique de l'Ouest, et je pense que ça s'arrête là, tous les hégémones, je parle de l'Afrique du Sud, je parle du Nigeria, sont en fait plus occupés par les tensions internes à leur pays que par leur capacité à régenter ce qui se passe dans la région. Donc, ils ont déjà beaucoup à faire à l'intérieur de leur pays qui traverse de multiples crises. Dans les autres régions, il est difficile même d'identifier un hégémone. Il y a une compétition d'hégémones régionaux en Afrique de l'Est, en Afrique centrale et bien sûr aussi en Afrique du Nord. Donc là, de ce côté. Alors moi, je pense que c'est véritablement l'Union africaine qui devrait mener ce débat, rassembler les États africains, mais il faut dire que l'Union africaine le fait déjà. Peut-être qu'elle ne le fait pas assez, peut-être qu'il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on pourrait améliorer, mais l'Union africaine le fait. Peut-être que la Commission et les États membres, et je suis tout à fait en accord avec l'ambassadeur Willy lorsqu'il dit qu'en fait, l'Union africaine est dans une sorte d'impasse. Elle est une organisation intergouvernementale, mais qui a une rhétorique et des normes qui ressemblent à des normes d'une organisation supranationale. Mais en réalité, la réalité de la gouvernance de l'Union africaine, c'est qu'elle est intergouvernementale, que ce qu'on appelle la commission reste un secrétariat, à vrai dire, qui exécute les décisions prises par les États membres. C'est un peu différent avec l'Union européenne, mais qui est tout à fait un autre animal. La vraie question que les États membres doivent se poser, c'est quelle est l'Union africaine qu'ils veulent à l'horizon 2063, qui est l'horizon de l'agenda 2063. Je pense que peut-être une des choses qu'on a ratées avec l'agenda 2063, c'est qu'on n'a pas défini le genre d'union africaine nécessaire pour mener l'Afrique à la vision 2063. Il est peut-être temps maintenant d'y réfléchir et de voir comment créer cette union africaine qui ait moins de tensions entre les États membres et la commission, ou alors que les tensions soient prévues, régulées avec un certain degré de prédictabilité. Merci.
Thank you. Let me wholeheartedly agree with my brother, Dr. Paul Simon Liesel, to your question of who should lead the debate and even issue a statement on the global rapture. We don't have an African Union statement right now on the global rapture or the shifting sands geopolitically. We don't have a ministerial, we don't have a head of state's statement. But I completely agree with Paul Simon that this should be led by the African Union, despite all the challenges internally. And it should start at the PRC level, in fact. And Ambassador Willie is here, and he is going to be chairing the PRC level. He has been receiving a lot of homework today from everyone with tasks to do, but he put his hand up as ambassador of Burundi, and he's now in the hot seat. So, and I think one thing you might not know, Ambassador Willie in a previous incarnation was a member of the African high-level panel of experts on the reform of the multilateral system, which was convened by the president of Namibia and Amani Africa. So he has the content already. He knows precisely what we have been saying on this issue. That was convened 2023, 2024. And I was on that panel as well. So we sat together. We had many of these debates. So Ambassador Willie, I feel now is your time. You have about 11 months to help Africa evolve and move forward. PRC can convene a policy roundtable, an informal meeting or a formal meeting to actually generate a statement, a PRC statement, Ambassador Willie, on the global rapture and the global reset and Africa's position on this. This is actually low-hanging fruit. You have ISS, you have IPSS, you have IGR. They'll help you convene. The African Union Network for Peace will help you convene. So you don't even have to lift a finger. Even the concept note, we might use ChatGPT, but that's another question. So Liesel, if it's not led by the whole of the 55 member state grouping, it will be dismissed by some countries as those big boys, they think they know it all, blah, blah, blah. We've been there before. We've seen it all. So definitely CFTA can issue one on punitive tariffs, but I think for the member states, it should be held at the center. By the PRC, first a ministerial, and I hope one day a head of state statement also. To Ambassador Al-Jawali on how Article 109 is aligned to global restructuring reparations, I think it's completely aligned. Slavery emerged in the 15th century when the Pope Alphonse issued an edict, a papal bull, to go forth and enslave all pagans. That task was taken on very forcefully by King Nicola of Portugal. And ever since then, this the overarching phenomenon of white supremacy essentially has persisted. The United Nations system, established in 1945, was dominated by colonial empires, which had a certain view of how they were going to govern. And I said only 3 African states were present. That means 52 of our member states were not there. And so if you're talking about historical redress, historical restitution, reparation for the exclusion of African countries, Article 109 is the vehicle to convene a global conference that will allow Africa to sit at the table as an equal member. And they often say, if you're not sitting at the table, you're more often than not on the menu. And Africa is definitely on the menu right now. And to reverse that, we need to launch this process. As I said, it will take 2 to 3 years to get to the outcome. But if we don't start it now, we will continue to see the disintegration that we're witnessing. And I think I should mention the president of Ghana, who is also championing the reparations issue with the hopefully soon to be announced African Union Committee of Experts on Reparations, and the African Union Legal Reference Group on Reparations has written a very powerful article in The Guardian. You can Google it, President Mahama's article in The Guardian about this very important case and need for reparations. And then very quickly to Berhanu, yes, the rapture is virtually everywhere. It seems like a global phenomenon. It seems also that autocracy is coming back in a very forceful manner. So we, those who believe in democracy, rule of law, must push back. I believe the AU is capable of reforming itself. But the key ingredient, the antidote that will help to heal the body of the AU and the Pan-African body politic is the ideas from the people, but also allowing the people to actually directly engage with those who are making the decisions. Hopefully we can move them. It's a big hope, it's a big if, but if we don't allow all these ideas that are floating around the world to take to be integrated into the decision-making structures of the African Union, then I think we shall continue to fragment. Kwame Nkrumah said Africa must unite or fragment individually, and we are disintegrating and fragmenting individually. Now is the time to turn the ship around and make sure that we can actually get to the point of Agenda 2063, the peaceful and prosperous Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists, the participants. So our attempt today is not really to address all this or to find conclusive responses to most of the challenges, but mainly to shed light on some of the burning questions. In that regards, we have succeeded in terms of really shedding light on the importance of ongoing reform processes, the gap between political commitment and implementation, issue of resources, dealing with external influences and all of that. So my last point would be that I hope we will be leaving the room with a commitment to contribute our own bits to the ongoing issues. Yes, the problems are old that we are hearing today, but the issues are fresh. So it's only collective effort that will take us out of this current predicament. Thank you very much. I'll give the floor to Timmy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's clear that we cannot replace AGA and APSA. We need to strengthen and adopt and make sure they are adaptable. The AU, as Dr. Andy said, is gradually becoming an actor of international policy, and it needs to disaggregate its strategy with its partners to be more deliberate. And of course, there's a need to invest in and be more deliberate in its preparedness. Otherwise, we would not move forward. And lastly, I think we will all agree that we cannot afford the death of multilateralism. So on this note, I would say we have come to the end of the program and we're inviting you for lunch. Thank you.